Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about horror trends and predictions for 2022. In this video I'm going to be going over some of the more popular horror books, TV shows, and movies that are anticipated this year. And I'm going to be talking about horror trends that we saw last year and ones that I expect we're going to see this year. So one trend that arose last year that I was really excited about was the rise of 90s horror, particularly 90s young adult horror, because it was during that era that I really became a fan of horror, in particular with R.L. Stein. I'm talking about the Netflix adaptation of Fear Street. That adaptation was super popular this summer. I don't know anyone that wasn't talking about it that's a horror fan. It was just a really good put together series. All three parts really connected really well. And even though it was really only inspired by the Fear Street books, I really suspect that we're going to see more adaptations, particularly from R.L. Stein. But I think just in general, that whole era, we're going to see more adaptations moving forward. And it's already begun. Christopher Pike was also really popular in the 90s, and his book The Midnight Club is getting adapted by Netflix, and I'm really excited that Mike Flanagan's going to be the one adapting it. For those of you that don't know, Mike Flanagan is the creator of The Haunting of Hill House, The Haunting of Bly Manor, and Midnight Mass. I love every one of those miniseries, particularly Midnight Mass, which besides Squid Games was probably my favorite TV show of last year, so I'm really excited for the adaptation of The Midnight Club. Another trend that was really big this year was vampires. I totally called it in my video on 2021 horror trends and predictions. Vampires was really big this year. In fact, it was bigger than I thought it was going to be, and that was without the release of Morbius. I kind of thought that Morbius was going to be the catalyst for the vampire trend and that we were going to see a lot more vampire content after that movie, but it seems like the trend kind of happened even without Morbius, and that Morbius might end up profiting from the trend that's already existing. One of the more popular places where we saw vampires last year was television, particularly with American Horror Story and Midnight Mass, but there was also a lot of vampire books that came out last year, and I think that this trend is going to continue well into 2022. So this year we're going to get a new adaptation of Interview with a Vampire, and it's going to be a television show, and I'm really excited about that, particularly because Anne Rice herself had said one time that she thought that her books would be better suited for television, and I really agree because I feel like some of the movie adaptations were a little bit rushed, so I'm really excited about that. And then First Kill is another vampire television show that's going to be coming out this year. And then of course Morbius. Like, Morbius was supposed to come out in 2020, then it was supposed to come out last year. Maybe this year's actually going to come out. I think it's really going to come out this year. Another trend that I predict continuing into 2022 is horror thriller hybrids, particularly domestic thriller hybrids. I think that this was really popular last year, particularly with the Night House film, which I still don't know how I feel about that film. I applaud it for doing something original, applaud it for going in a direction that I don't think anybody could have anticipated. Just such a odd film, and I usually love odd films, but that one I think what it was is that the payoff didn't feel right for me, but I do appreciate that they did something original. The Night House is a film about a widow that investigates her husband's suicide, and as she's investigating she finds out that he had hurt lots of women before he killed himself, and as she discovers the reason why. It's very bizarre, and it definitely falls into the realm of supernatural horror. So that's what I'm talking about when I refer to like thriller horror hybrids. Talking about like adding supernatural or otherworldly elements into a domestic thriller. I think that the returning to a small town trope is going to be massive this year. I think that like of all the books I read, probably 1 out of every 5 involved a character like returning to a small town they grew up in, or, you know, moving to a small town to get away, which is a really common element in folk horror, so I also think that we're going to see a rise in folk horror this year as well, but I definitely just think that we're going to see that trope of characters moving to a small town. One book coming out this year that follows that trend is Beulah by Christy Noble. The story is about a teenager who moves to a small town with her mother and siblings, and she is a psychic, and she finds out one of her siblings is a psychic, and they are being haunted by ghosts. So really interesting, and you know, it follows that format of we're moving to a small town to get a new start. So I know I already mentioned this briefly, but another trend that I see being popular this year is folk horror, particularly regarding gods and monsters. In my last predictions video, I also mentioned folk horror, Didn't see it as much in 2021 as I thought we were going to, but I definitely think we're going to see it this year. You know, folk horror and small towns, they really go together. One folk horror novel that's coming out this year is Monster by Jessica Lewis. It's about a girl that's offered up as a sacrifice during a ritual, and she makes a deal with the monster that if he lets her go, she'll take vengeance on those that betrayed her. I really love this concept, and I'm really excited about this book. The last trend I want to talk about pertains solely to horror movies, and it's a trend that we've seen in Hollywood for a really long time now, but it's just particularly glaringly obvious this year. And that trend is sequelitis. There are so many horror sequels coming out this year. Just to name a few, we are getting sequels to Scream, Halloween, Orphan, Jeepers Creepers, Predator, Terrifier, and Evil Dead. And this isn't including reboots either, which may or may not kind of serve as sequels, like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Hellraiser. Some people are like really strongly opposed to sequels and remakes. I'm kind of iffy. I feel like they're good like half the time. I am really excited about the next Scream movie. I think of all the sequels and remakes that are coming out this year, that's the one that I'm most excited about. So that's my predictions for 2022. That's what I think we're going to see this year. I'm pretty excited about most of these trends aside from sequelitis. I have nothing against sequels. I'm just not particularly excited about most of the sequels we're going to have this year, except Scream. One horror movie that I'm really looking forward to this year is The Black Phone, which is adapted from Joe Hill's short story in 20th Century Ghosts. I absolutely love that collection, and that was one of my favorite stories in it, so I'm really excited to see how they expand that story and turn it into an entire movie. So I'm really curious what predictions you think are going to come true this year and what trends that you're anticipating we're going to see in 2022. So please leave a comment below because I'm really curious to know what you guys think. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On this channel, I post book reviews, writing advice, horror content, and vlogs. And I just edited a horror anthology called Roadkill 6, Texas Horror by Texas Writers. I'll include a link for that in the description box below if you want to check it out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.